Hi, I'm Tom Phillips, and you're watching the BuzzFeed and Facebook EU Referendum Town Hall Live. The first ever event like this on Facebook Live. We've got an audience waiting in our arena right now, and the person they're waiting for is Prime Minister David Cameron. You know, we asked him if he wanted to pop round, he didn't have anything else to do, you know how it goes. In just a few minutes, the Prime Minister will be telling our audience and all of you watching on Facebook why he thinks that we should vote to remain in the EU. We'll be talking a bit more about him in a moment. Just before this, we heard from a man who's definitely not a fan of Europe. That's UKIP leader Nigel Farage. Now, he had this to say, and he was talking, you'd be surprised to learn, about immigration.
That if you have a sensible, balanced immigration policy that has numbers coming into a country on a reasonable level, the chances of integration are very high. If you have an irresponsible immigration policy and very large numbers of people coming into the country, the chances of integration are very low. That's all I'm saying.
So, was everything Nigel Farage said on the level? Let's ask an immigrant. I'm joined by Alberto Nardelli, BuzzFeed UK's Europe editor and well-dressed Italian man. So now, Farage spoke there about immigration. He talked about it in the context of integration. He talked about it in the context of public services. To what extent is his take on that correct?
I think this is a very complicated issue in the sense that, on the one hand, some of the things that Nigel Farage says are correct. It is true that Britain's population is growing very quickly, and when you have rapid population growth, you will have pressure on public services. However, Farage often forgets the other side of the coin, which is that lots of the people that work in these public services are migrants. Migrants contribute more to the economy than they take out of the economy, meaning that they contribute to those public services, and so on and so on. And it's very difficult to then have such a simplified answer when the issue is so complicated.
So he tends to say that immigrants are the cause of many things, but doesn't take into account the fact that there's a balance on the other side.
Absolutely. Another example is that in population growth, you also have an aging population, while migrants tend to be younger and more productive than native populations.
Alberto, thank you. Now, of course, we're here at Facebook, and every day we all give them a glimpse into every single aspect of our lives. So earlier on, I spoke with Theo Lomas about the issues in the EU referendum that people have been talking about on Facebook.
First, let me set the scene. There's been 38 million interactions on Facebook since the 5th of March. To put that into context, we have 37 million people using Facebook every single month. But let's have a quick look at what they're actually talking about. If we go over to this timeline, you can see that the three biggest topics that are being discussed are immigration, economy and health. And they've actually been fairly similar levels throughout the campaign. What's really interesting is you've seen this massive spike as the campaign's gone into the official campaign period.
Around sort of mid-May, it's got a lot more interesting. Now, is there any sort of change and difference in who is talking about those things, like by age, by gender, anything like that?
Yeah, let's delve into the data. Let's have a look here. What you can see here is if we click through into the overall conversation, we can see there's actually been a fairly even split within 5 percentage points of men versus women. But actually, when we get to the age groups, 25 to 54-year-olds have had the bulk of the conversation. 18 to 24-year-olds at 12%. And when we actually look at the issues they're talking about, younger people are talking about the economy. This middle group I was discussing just then are focusing on immigration, and that 55 plus are interacting around issues on healthcare.
Okay, that's really interesting, actually. Okay. And how about, like, across the country? Are we seeing any differences in, like, where the people talking about different things are?
Yes, very much so. So let's head over to these heat maps over here. What you can see from this map is, quite interestingly, the bulk of the conversation has actually been taking place mostly in England. Scotland and Northern Ireland have actually had a much lower level of the conversation.
Okay, that's really interesting. And how about the different campaigns? Are they sort of differently distributed around the country?
Yeah, so we've had a quick look at the way that the two campaign pages are set up on Facebook, and actually we can see for the Strong Green campaign they have these small concentrations in small areas across England.
So there's quite a lot in sort of London, down in Brighton, up in some of the cities up in the north, and a weird spike there in
Aberystwyth.
Yes. You're from Aberystwyth? Why? And about the Vote Leave?
So let's have a quick look at the Vote Leave page. much more evenly spread, as you can see, and actually the bulk of the conversation seems to be happening up here in the northeast and the southeast as well.
OK. And how about sort of, are there anything more fun cultural differences between them?
Yeah, we've done a little bit of fun. Don't read too much into it, but we can actually have a look at what kind of pages do people who like the official campaign pages like. And what we can see here with the Vote Leave page, which is slightly bigger than the Strong in Europe, you know, one of the most popular things that people who are reading for the Vote Leave campaign page is 50 Shades of Grey. OK, that's interesting. And I see that on sports team, Vote Leave like Liverpool FC, whereas Stronger In like Barcelona, which is interesting. And favourite actor I quite like there. Yeah, read into it what you will, just a bit of fun.
Well, damn, that was some data. OK, what should we talk about next? Oh, I know. How about the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? That's David Cameron, your Prime Minister. This is a man who has come under quite some pressure lately from voters, from political opponents, and also from frenemies like Boris Johnson, to the extent that it's hard not to feel maybe a little bit sorry for him, maybe. But who is David Cameron? What are his hopes and dreams? With us again, we have Alberto, famous for his considerable knowledge of European politics and his excellent hair, may I say, and socks. These are great socks.
Thank you.
So, Alberto, will you just say some words about the economy at me, please?
Well, the economy is the Prime Minister's favourite topic. We are going to hear him repeat many times that Britain will be safer, more secure and better off in the EU. He is probably going to tell us that most of the world's leading economists, experts, international organisations and world leaders pretty much all agree with him on this topic. And to be fair, most experts on the Leave side also believe that in the short term, at least, there would be uncertainty if Britain were to leave the European Union.
When you say uncertainty, does that mean uncertainty over a few days, weeks, years, decades, generations? What does that mean?
It will probably be a few years. It will take a while before we know what relationship Britain would have with what remains of the European Union. The longer term, however, is a lot more complicated because that depends on assumptions. So what you think is going to happen elsewhere in the world and in the economy, so what was going to happen in the Eurozone, what types of trade relations would Britain have. And the government kind of says things are going to be terrible even in the longer term, but that is really because of the assumptions that it is making. The truth is, we don't know what Britain would be like in the longer term if it left the European Union. OK,
well, riddle me this, Alberto. I have a large, considerable American student loan in dollars, but I get paid in pounds. Sorry, I'm sure this applies to some other people too. What happens to the pound if we leave? That's a complicated question, but most people agree that in the short term, the value of the pound would drop if Britain left the EU. So going on holiday, once you I was going to say, what about my big gal's Spanish holiday coming up too?
Well, once you get to Spain, it would probably be more expensive unless you bring all your food and drink with you from the UK.
Unlikely, but what happens also, I can't believe it's taken me this long to ask you this, what happens to the price of a glass of fine Italian wine?
Well, it depends on what relationship Britain would have with what remains of the European Union. So we don't know how much wine would cost. I think if we were to look at it from, say, a probability point of view, it is likely, though, that Britain were to leave the European Union, Italian wine wouldn't cost less.
What would it mean for the considerable British trade in Prosecco?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. Did you know that Britain is the largest importer of Prosecco in the world?
I did know that, Alberto, because you talk about it all the time.
It is an amazing statistic if you think about it. So, again, it really depends on what relationship the country would have with the rest of the EU. The truth is that if Britain were to leave the EU, we don't know what that trade relationship would look like. There are instances and arrangements that you could have certain scenarios in which Prosecco could cost more.
OK. Well, this is all uncertain and terrifying. But thank you very much, Alberto. You have been a shining constellation of a man today.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, guys. Now, we're just a few seconds away from our fourth and final town hall with Prime Minister David Cameron facing our live audience's questions and your questions if you put them in the Facebook comments. But let's go over right now to the arena with BuzzFeed UK's Emily Ashton and Jim Waterson.
Hello and welcome to the arena. I'm Emily Ashton.
And I'm Jim Waterson, and we've been joined all afternoon by an audience of BuzzFeed readers who've come with questions for the fourth of our live EU referendum town halls with Facebook.
Now, in a moment, we'll be joined by the Prime Minister, David Cameron, representing the Remain campaign. While you're watching, let us know whether you agree or not with what he has to say. Show us how you feel by using the love or the angry reactions on Facebook. And keep an eye out for our reaction tracker at the bottom of the screen during the show.
Tell us what you'd like to ask him by posting your questions here on BuzzFeed's Facebook page as a comment, and our own Remy Patel will select some to ask David Cameron during the next 40 minutes.
So now, to make the case for remaining in the EU, will you please welcome the Prime Minister, David Cameron.
Well, thank you very much for welcoming me here tonight. I want to make a wholly positive case for staying inside a reformed European Union. I believe we'll be stronger, we'll be safer, and we'll be better off. Stronger because being part of this organisation helps us to tackle problems that affect us and affect the world, whether climate change or tackling poverty in Africa. It makes us safer because in a dangerous world there's strength in numbers, and we can tackle terrorism and extremism better if we work with allies and friends in the European Union. But above all, we'll be better off if we stay part of the single market of 500 million customers, the biggest market in the world that we have complete access to, that is vital for our business, for our jobs, for our livelihoods. And particularly tonight, I want to talk about the opportunities there are as being part of a European Union that gives us jobs and opportunities, particularly for young people as they start out in their life. Let's not swap that for a decade of uncertainty, so let's vote to remain on June the 23rd.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and we'll not mess about. We'll get straight on to the first question, which is from Maria. Maria, where are you?
Hi, Maria.
Hi. If you genuinely believe that coming out of the EU is going to be such a massive disaster, why are you trusting the general public to make such an incredibly important decision?
Because I'm a Democrat. I mean, at the end of the day, the people are sovereign. It's your decision. And we haven't had a referendum on Europe since the 1970s. This generation hasn't had a say. And I think, frankly, we've had a lot of moments where it sounded like we were going to have a referendum, or we were promised a referendum, and it didn't happen. And I think it's time we had one. At the end of the day, the British people are sovereign. You'll give us the instruction, either stay in or get out. But I've always said, all my political life, we're better off staying in a reformed Europe. I was criticised, actually, during the renegotiation. Some people said, why don't you threaten more to leave? And I said, well, I think the right outcome is staying in a reformed European Union. And that's why I'm making the case as strongly as I am today.
Do you think that we should have been given the option? Would you prefer that people weren't even given the vote?
So I agree that we should stay in the EU, but I've only come to that conclusion after doing a lot of my own research that wasn't to do with anything from either campaign, because it's all so biased. And I don't feel like we've received any unbiased information to make our own decisions from a good point of view, because yeah, it's the propaganda leaflet, and I want to remain, but I read that and I was like, there are no sources in this. I'm an academic, and I was like, this is completely incredible, and it's just...
Well, I'd make 2 points. I mean, first of all, there are a lot of independent organisations that have made clear their view. So whether you agree with them or not, you've got people like the Governor of the Bank of England. He's a Canadian who came to work here in Britain. He's got an independent view. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, often trenchant critics of the government, saying that we're clearly better off in and our economy would be smaller if we were out. Just yesterday, the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, impeccably independent body, again, frequent critic of mine, giving very clear and unbiased advice. And let me defend the leaflet, because I know it's controversial, but look, the government has a view. We had a cabinet meeting, we had a discussion, we decided the government's view was that we were better off remaining. And I think it right, if the government has a clear view, to communicate very directly to the public.
Your responsibility to provide unbiased information. You're fair enough, have an opinion,
yeah.
But don't you think that's what the government should be responsible for?
And that is that, and that is. Yes, I do, and that the government has put out a lot of information.
Where is it? How?
Well, I would say that it's in that leaflet, it's in the Treasury analysis, it's in the balance of competencies review, lots of things that we have put out. And I would say Look, there's a weight of evidence, particularly on the economic front. And I would say you can either be convinced by the evidence. Look at the Bank of England, look at the International Monetary Fund, the OECD, the 9 out of 10 economists. You can look at all those things. Or you can just consider the simple argument, which I would make, which is today we've got unrestricted access to a market of 500 million people. If we leave, inevitably, we're not going to have as good access to that market because you're not going to get a better deal on the outside than the deal you get on the inside.
Prime Minister,
and given, hold on, one last point. Given that 44% of what we make and sell overseas goes to the European Union, if we restrict that market, our economy will be smaller. And if your economy is smaller, you've got less money to spend on public services, you've got fewer jobs, you've got fewer livelihoods. So it stands to sense. And I think that's the single most powerful argument in this whole referendum campaign. But I recognise we've got more work to do in the last 13 days to make that point.
But if the case is so overwhelming, if the case is so strong to stay in the EU, then why are the polls so close at this stage? Why have you not been able to sell that to the British people?
Let's not make the mistake. In the election, there was an awful lot of the commentary was determined by what the polls seemed to be saying. I think we should just forget about the polls. There's going to be a poll in 13 days' time. Everyone gets to choose. And the great thing about a referendum is that everyone's vote is worth the same. It's not a question of marginal seats and where do you live and what's the electoral system. Every vote counts the same. So don't let the polls determine what people think of the campaign. Let's have a big discussion and a big argument about whether we're better off in or out and take it from there.
OK, Prime Minister, we have another question over here from Emily. Emily, what's your question?
So obviously this referendum is really close and you support the Remain campaign. Given the fact that 16 and 17-year-olds overwhelmingly support Remain, do you regret not giving them a vote?
I don't, actually. We had a vote in Parliament on it. I think it is a balanced argument. I've always tended to the view that 18 is the right age for majority, as is for many other things. But I can see there's a case. We've now got votes for 16 and 17-year-olds in the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly. So I think we should go on debating it and discussing it. But Parliament decided that's what the rule is, and that's what we're going to do on June the 23rd.
Emily, do you think they should have been given a vote?
I do think they should have been given a vote, yeah.
Right, Michael, we've got a question.
Barry.
Well, given this thing about the jobs that you're saying,
Yeah.
creating more jobs, etc., in the EU, can you tell me why since 1975 our industries have crashed because of the EU? They've all disappeared completely. The last remaining heavy industry we actually have is the steel industry, and yet the EU are preventing us from saving it and preventing the government from nationalising it. I'm sure there's an awful lot of Welsh people in this country that will be absolutely inflamed by that.
Well, let me answer on steel in a second, but can I take one industry which is actually doing extremely well inside the EU, in Britain, and that is the car industry. When I was... Yeah, hang on. Oh, let me, Barry, let me just briefly on the figures, because there are 150,000 people working in the car industry. Our output's gone up 60% in the last 10 years. We've got Toyota, we've got Nissan, we've got Jaguar Land Rover, we've got Ford, we've got Vauxhall. They're all doing well. 300,000 extra people supply that industry, and around half of what they export goes straight to Europe. And that is, you know, those companies invest in Britain in part because we're inside the European Union. If we left and we had the status of America, which is what some of the Leave campaigners want us to have, you'd pay a 10% tariff on every car that we sell into the European Union. That would be bad for that industry.
Okay,
I can come back on steel if you want me to, but I just want to make that point. So I don't accept. We're a much richer economy, a more prosperous economy than we ever were in 1972 when we joined. And we should recognise a lot of that is down to the hard work of the British people and all the work that they've done. But being in the EU and this market of 500 million people clearly helps.
Yeah, but how...
Okay, thank you, Barry. I just say, Michael, where's Michael? Can we get... there we are. Okay.
Well, the point is, the ones I mentioned aren't British-owned. They're not. But the whole point is, they're employing British people. They're employing British designers.
So the money is going abroad.
Yeah, no, the money is going to the pockets of car workers in our country.
Yeah,
I think of near my constituency is the Mini plant, right? You know, a great
BMW
British brand, a great British brand, but now invested in by a German company, rolling cars off that production line, providing jobs, providing skills, providing apprenticeships. It's a great business.
So BMW are going to be charged tariffs for us exporting minis into Germany?
If we're outside the single market, yes.
Okay.
That's the point. That's absolutely the point.
Let's move on. Let's move on.
Right, very quickly, Mike, if you could keep it short.
Yeah, Mr. Cameron, in 2009, before the EU elections, you spoke against the EU, saying it was taking away sovereignty from our Parliament and that it was federalist. In 2010, you promised to cut immigration to tens of thousands. Last year, when speaking to the CBI, you said how Great Britain could thrive outside the EU. Were you telling the truth then, or was you wrong? Or are you telling the truth now, or are you wrong? Either way, why should we listen to you?
Well, let me take all three of those. First of all, in 2009, I was not arguing that Britain should come out of the EU. I've always argued, all my political life, stay in, but get reform. I always opposed joining the euro. I always said it was right to keep the pound, but I've had the same view, stay in and get reform, and that's what we've done. Now, in terms of what I'm saying now, frankly, if I wanted an easier life with a slightly, let's be honest, divided Conservative Party, if I wanted an easier life, I'd say, look, it's a big decision. There's strong arguments on one side, strong arguments on the other side. It's a balanced view, and on balance, I think we should stay. And I'd have a quieter life. I'm not saying that. And do you know why I'm not saying that? I don't believe it. I don't think it is a very nuanced or balanced view. I think it's very clear that we'll be stronger, safer, and better off if we stay in. Now, people can disagree with me, and they can take the alternative view and they can vote against. But I don't want to wake up as your Prime Minister on the 24th of June feeling I haven't been frank and clear about what I think. And I do worry about the economic impact of leaving. I was at a business today in Harlow that makes parts that goes into the Airbus aeroplanes that we make in Wales. Those businesses are reliant on access to a European market. Why would we want a worse deal with that market than we have now? Why would we want to threaten jobs?
Well, we're going to go... Sorry, Mike, we haven't got time to have a comeback.
We import more from Europe than we export.
Let's deal... This is a really important... Mike's got a very important point about the balance of who imports...
If they put tariffs on our goods, we can do likewise.
Okay, Mike, I think it's a really important point.
They close their own businesses down. It's not going to happen. Mercedes is not going to happen.
Really important point. Mike is absolutely right. We import more goods from Europe than they import from us. But there are two very key statistics that I think we need to get straight when we're thinking about facts. 44% of what we make and sell goes to the European Union. In terms of what the European Union makes and sells abroad, around 8% of what they make comes to us. So if we were outside and we were negotiating our way back in with a trade deal, those are the dynamics. 44% of what we sell, 8% of what they sell. Second point, Mike, and this is really important. Yes, we've got a deficit when it comes to goods, but we've got a massive surplus when it comes to services. Insurance, banking, legal services, architecture, all the rest of it. And services are 80% of our economy. So it's absolutely vital to have that market access for services, which is much more difficult to get in these trade deals around the world, and including with the European Union. Canada, great trade deal with the European Union, doesn't cover all of services. That's not good enough for us. I don't want that for our country. I want us to have the best opportunity, the best chance to get into that European market and employ more people in our country and see livelihoods and growth that way around. And that's why I'm so passionate about this issue.
Remy, we're going to see what's going on Facebook. What have you got for us from there?
A lot of people on Facebook are asking about immigration. So, Prime Minister, we've got, first of all, Claire Blaze. She's asking, we don't feel safe in London due to mass crime and immigration. By staying in, can you control immigration overtaking our city? And similarly, Matt Will has also said, David Cameron, the British people are not as stupid as you'd like to believe. So please, in all honesty, how do you intend to tackle the huge scale of immigration the United Kingdom is currently under?
Okay, well, first of all, let's deal with the law and order issue. I think, we should say what a great job our police do. They've had a very tough budgetary situation in the last 5 years, but actually they've got a greater... Well, thanks to the fact we've been clearing up a huge mess in our economy, and they've done a very good job at getting police onto the front line, and crime rates have actually come down. On immigration, I think there are good ways to control immigration, and frankly, I think there are bad ways. A good way is to say that European Union nationals who want to come to our country, that they've got to come and work. And under the rules we've negotiated, if they come, they don't get unemployment benefit. If they don't have a job and can't support themselves, after 6 months, they have to go home. And if they do get a job, they have to work and pay into the system for 4 years before they get full access to our welfare system. I think that's a good way. I think that's a good way to reform immigration. I think a bad way is actually to leave the single market, disadvantage our businesses, and see jobs and our economy suffer as a result. I think that would be the wrong thing to do.
Just sorry, Mike, you've had you say. Mike, you've had you say.
Yes, absolutely.
I just want to ask the woman at the back there, her view.
Right, So I'm voting Remain, but nothing to do with you guys. I hate the Tories. I'm just going to say you've fucked every fucking thing up in this country. You've screwed students, you've screwed the disabled, the vulnerable. I mean, seriously, like you want to. I've heard that you want to take back the Human Rights Act and everything as well. And I could totally believe that. I wouldn't put that past you at all, Dodgy Dave.
Well, Yasmin, I don't want to put you off. Look,
Okay.
you and I can have a... That's the great thing about this debate. You can have a ferocious argument with someone about health policy or education policy or human rights policy, but this issue of whether we stay in or get out of the European Union actually transcends those things. And so I would argue, one of the strengths of the side of the argument that Yasmin and I are on is I've got, the Labour Party, a Conservative government, the Lib Dems, the Greens, the trade unions. We argue with each other. We've got a lot of differences about a lot of things, but on this issue, we have the broadest possible coalition saying it's better off, stronger and safer to stay in.
I just don't want to give any more power to the Tories, because that'll be the worst thing for us right now.
Well, obviously, Yasmin, you and I, we're not going to agree about that one, but at least we're on the same side on this one.
We
Okay,
have to trade, because the number of people relative to the resources of the country, but the trade is very unbalanced. Net of, including services, we send every year 60 billion to Europe, or over $1 billion a week, in unbalanced trade for imports in excess of our exports. Now, if we used our financial clout with other countries, like we've got a 2-to-1 ratio with Germany, 2-to-1 ratio with France, 2.5-to-1 ratio with Italy, if we use our financial clout to have balanced trade with those countries, then we'd be better off. Can you do that in the EU? You don't seem
David,
to have done so far.
the problem with that argument is that if we were to leave the EU, we're not having bilateral discussions with France and Germany about individual trade deals. We'd be having a bilateral discussion with the remnants of the European Union. So there would be 60 million Brits, fifth largest economy in the world, hugely successful country, 60 million Brits doing trade negotiations with 440 million remaining in the EU. That's the way it works. And my point is that, yes, 44% of what we sell goes there, but only 8% of what they sell comes here.
So 2-to-1 ratio.
Well, that's not 2-to-1, I'm afraid.
We do need to...
No, 2-to-1 in trade.
It's 5-to-1 the other way.
It's 2-to-1 in trade.
OK, running out of time.
So it is
We're going to move to the next question.
Well, I've given you the figures, so look, people want facts and figures. Those are very important facts and figures. Trade negotiations aren't a love-it. America is one of our oldest friends in the world. How much beef do we sell to America? British beef, best beef in the world? None. Zero. None at all, because they banned it 20 years ago. We haven't been able to get back into that market. And if you're out of the European Union trading bloc, you would be seriously disadvantaged. And that, I believe, are the facts.
OK, Prime Minister, question over here. Question over here on immigration from Catherine Dye.
Yes. Hello, Prime Minister.
Hi.
To touch on that point on immigration, if we stayed in the EU, how do you predict an increase in the minimum wage would affect net migration numbers?
Well, I think the minimum wage, the national living wage, is just a good thing for our country. I think people should get that £7.20 an hour that we've set out, and that is, under 25s, we have a minimum wage rate as well for them. But I think it's the right thing to do. What I'd say is, as I've said, good ways to control immigration, bad ways to control immigration. But we should understand, I think, that the last 5 years have been quite extraordinary, because we created more jobs in Britain than the rest of the European Union countries put together. Now, that is changing. There have been terrible problems in the Eurozone, and Nigel Farage was talking about them. But actually, those countries are beginning to recover. The Irish grew 7% last year. The Spanish... No, Greece is not recovering. Absolutely, having a terrible time. That's why we stayed out of the Eurozone. But, Spain is growing now. France is growing. The Eurozone countries are growing. And so I think what you're going to see is less of the pressure that we've had because we were the strong growth country in Europe. Okay. We shouldn't hold back a good minimum wage for our own people because of concerns in Europe.
We've got a question over here from Anjali over there.
Hi, Anjali.
Hi, Prime Minister. I am an Indian national living and working in the UK, and I have spent a lot of money in visa application fees, in NHS surcharge. I have to consistently prove my worthiness to be in this country because I am in skilled employment, and someone from the EU comes in without any questions whether they are in skilled work or unskilled work or cannot even speak any English, and I always feel like an outsider because I have to consistently prove my worth. So when you talk about immigration, what do you have to say about people from outside the EU like me? Is it all about geography and not equality just because I am from Asia and someone else who is from Europe?
I make 2 points. First of all, people who come to our country from all over the world make a great contribution. For instance, We have no restrictions on the number of people who can come and study at British universities. If you have an English language qualification and a place, you can come, and we welcome people to our country. But we are part of a single market in Europe, and the single market is, if you like, a set of rules, one of which is British people can go and work without visas or permits or anything else in other European countries, and other European nationals can come and work here. Those are the single market rules, and for that we get this access to 500 million consumers. And so it's a different situation than we have with the rest of the world. We need to make sure our situation with the rest of the world is fair and controlled. I would obviously argue, as Prime Minister, responsible for the rules, that it is. We do have to make sure there isn't abuse. We had, when I became Prime Minister, a huge problem of bogus colleges. We wanted people to come to our universities, but there were a lot of colleges that were set up that weren't really colleges at all. They were just ways of helping people to come here. So we closed a lot of those colleges. But my argument comes back to the single market. It's very much in our national interest to have that market, to make it work for Britain, and if we leave, we'll reduce our economic opportunities and opportunities for young people.
Could we just quickly hear from the woman just behind us? Just behind. Okay.
How about a points-based system for people in the EU as well, so that there is equality? People from outside the EU and in the EU.
I don't agree with that approach. We have a points-based system, as it were, for the rest of the world. And inside the EU, we have the single market system. Now, inside the EU, we do need to deal with abuses. And part of my renegotiation was to make sure that people who can't support themselves can be deported. People who have a criminal record and we think they could commit another crime, we can keep them out. We're not part of the no borders zone, but we're making further improvements. But we do have two systems, one inside the single market and one with the rest of the world, and that's the view I support.
Just very quickly to the lady just there, please.
Hi.
Hi, Flora.
I wanted to ask why, given we've been a member of the EU and its predecessors for sort of 40-odd years, why has this inspired so little affection among the British and the people of the United Kingdom today?
Very, very good question. I think that's partly because I think Britain is quite different. I think we've had an uninterrupted history of not being invaded, of having institutions that have worked quite well in our country. And so we see European cooperation as something that is good for us and sensible for us, but we're more practically attached to it rather than emotionally attached to it. I'm emotionally attached to the United Kingdom. I love this country. I want to keep it together. I want it to be as strong as possible. I'm not emotionally attached to the European Union or the institutions of it. I just think our country will be better, stronger, more able to do things in the world if we stay in this organisation. I think for some other Europeans it's been more emotional, partly because of the history of the wars and the invasions and all the rest of it. But even a flinty-hearted conservative like me, when I sit round that table with the 27 other prime ministers, often driving me up the wall, I do think, whatever I think of this organisation, it has helped to keep the peace in Europe. Countries that used to fight now talk and debate and reach agreement in that way, rather than all the problems we've had in our past. And we should have, if you like, an attachment to that, because that's good. You know, as Winston Churchill said, we may not be of Europe, but we're with Europe. And I think our membership, our special status, not in the Euro, not in the no borders zone, not in ever closer union, but a full member, a full voting member to get things done, I think that reflects the special status that we deserve.
Okay,
so
Prime Minister. So we're going over to Remy, who has some reaction from Facebook.
Yeah, we have a lot of people talking about the treatment of non-EU migrants. So we've got Curtis Bly here who says, why do you discriminate against non-EU migrants? And Shahid Omer says, this government has been highly racist against non-EU migrants.
Well, obviously, I don't agree with that. I think we have a fair system, part of the single market, so we can all work and live and travel in any European country without any visas, without any paperwork, and other Europeans are able to come here. And then for the rest of the world, obviously we do need to have a system of control. Now, you can argue that it could be more generous or less generous, it could be fair in this way or that way. I would defend what we've put in place, because I thought the system that we inherited wasn't particularly fair. For instance, there was, under the previous government's point system, there was a category for unskilled migrants from outside the EU, and I thought that wasn't necessary, so we closed that down. But I'm happy to have the debate, but, you know, I think in the end, this is an argument about whether we stay in or get out of a reformed European Union. The rules we have for immigration outside the EU, that's a matter of national sovereignty. We can either think we got them right or we got them wrong, But we're not going to solve that by coming out of Europe.
OK, let's move on. We've got a question from Vanessa. Can you read out your question?
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi. My question for you is, how is the Conservative Party going to gel together after the EU referendum, whether we vote to remain or whether we vote to exit? Because there's a lot of things that have been said. I mean, my family, we obviously debate about this a lot, but our words haven't been recorded in newspapers, on TV. So how do you plan to get back together after this? Because a lot of hurtful things have been said.
It is a passionate debate, and one of the reasons I thought it was necessary to say that members of my government who didn't agree with the government position to stay in could campaign in a personal capacity on the other side. But I would argue it is passionate, but we all share one view, which is it's right to hold the referendum. The British people are sovereign, they will decide, and we will come together afterwards and obey their instructions. And I think, look, it's my belief, I think that once this is over, actually people will say, right, we had the debate, we had the decision, now let's get on with all the other things that we want to do in government. And I profoundly believe that will happen.
Prime Minister...
But we'll find out in 13 days' time.
Vanessa, did you have a follow-up?
There's a lot of... Sorry, just the last point that you said about how we might move on. There are a lot of news articles saying that there are MPs who are saying that if the vote was to exit, they would try and block that from happening. Do you...
I think that's completely unrealistic. Look, if the British public say we stay in, we stay in. If the British public say we get out, we get out. And I think Parliament must respect and would respect the will of the British people.
And just on that Conservative Party issue, I mean, last night we saw another debate, Amber Rudd, Boris Johnson. Lots of insults thrown at Boris Johnson's way. How did you feel about that? Do you feel a bit sorry for him?
I've done these debates. They're lively affairs, and that's the way it is. I'm going to spend all my time, if I can, in the next 13 days, on the arguments. Because I think, look, we're just demonstrating it tonight. Immigration, inside the EU, outside the EU, single market, jobs, steel industry, cars. There's so much real argument to get into and get across that I'm going to spend all my time on that.
Why won't you debate Boris Johnson, though?
Well, because I don't think this is... Look, my team on this question is not just the Conservative government. It's the Labour Party, the Greens, the Lib Dems. I want to demonstrate the breadth of the coalition behind staying in. I don't want this to look like the, Dave versus Boris show, because that's not actually what it is. Secondly, I love doing town halls like this. I think the more you can answer questions and speak directly to people, I think the better. So I'm very pleased that, last night we had a talented team, a big range. You got Nicola Sturgeon. I don't agree with her about many things, but she's a fantastic debater, and I agree about this. I thought, you've got Maria Eagle, you've got Amber Rudd, good team. And I want the whole team to be out there, not just me.
Okay. So we've got another question on this topic from Emma Fox. Is Emma here? Where's Emma? Over there. Fantastic.
Hi, Emma.
That's the joy of live TV.
Just wait for the mic. One second.
Thanks.
Here we go.
Unfortunately, I won't be able to vote because I'm too young, so I feel a little bit excluded from the campaign. But I was just wondering, if there is a Brexit on the 23rd of June, will you have Boris Johnson in your cabinet?
Well, obviously, after the... that's very direct, quite right. After the 23rd of June, we're obviously going to have to digest the results and then work out what happens next, how we meet the instructions of the British people. I've always said, without giving too much away, that I'm a believer in having all your sort of stars on the pitch. Boris Johnson is a very significant figure in the Conservative Party. He was a very effective Mayor of London. Obviously, on this, I think he's got it wrong. And I don't agree with him, and I think it's a dangerous course that we'd be taking. But as a principle, I believe as a Prime Minister, making a team, you want to have the strongest players that you can in the team.
Well, Prime Minister, we've now got a split within the party. You've got two teams, and bringing them together is going to be very hard. I mean...
Well, obviously, it's a challenge, but I just don't think it's impossible, because I think, we have worked together. Boris as Mayor and me as Prime Minister, we've worked together for many years.
Do you personally sort of stay up at night worrying about the outcome of this referendum?
Of course, I'm very concerned about the outcome of this referendum because I think it's so important for our country, because it's bigger than a general election. In a general election, you pick a team. If you don't like them, you can kick them out in 5 years' time. With this, we're going to live with this decision, and young people are going to live with this decision for the longest. And so I am very concerned that we get the arguments across as clearly as we can do. Because I think it's so important for us.
Do you think there's a real chance you can lose?
I think it's... I don't think the polls... I don't think anyone knows what they... There's nothing really to compare with them before.
It?
So I think it's very competitive out there. That's what I feel, as you go around meeting people, going to businesses, going to schools. It's a huge debate, a lot of people still making up their mind. And here's the difference with a general election. In a general election, when people say to you, I haven't decided, that normally means they're being polite, but they're definitely not voting for you. With this, I actually think people really haven't decided. They're thinking it through, they're talking about it with their families and friends and businesses, and so I think each of the next 13 days is really going to count.
OK, I just want to hear from a few members of the audience, but if you haven't got a mic coming to you, please stay quiet so we can get round people. Jessica, just really quickly, what were you on to say?
Hi, Jessica.
So you said before, well, it was said before that for a British university you have to be able to speak English. Well, my mother's in the NHS and has to deal with interpreters all the time for non-English speakers in Manchester. How can we be letting in people that can't speak our own language into the country from the EU? It's not a feasible thing. It shouldn't be happening like that. I shouldn't be walking round. It's all right if they know the language as well, but they should be able to speak our language as well as their own.
Well, obviously, we want people who come here to learn the language, and we're doing a lot to help with that. But I would make the argument about the NHS is the NHS depends on a strong economy. And if we leave the single market, we'll have a weaker economy and therefore a weaker NHS. And that's why in the NHS, you've got the Royal College of Midwives, the Royal College of Physicians, the guy that runs the NHS, the TUC, all arguing that we should stay in because a strong NHS needs a strong economy.
Yes, but I asked about the patients who are going in who can't speak English, the interpreters. Right. There are some that bring in their family and expect them to interpret for them. How can...
Well, we have to... Just very quickly, Jessica, you're absolutely right. We have to make sure we help those people, and we have to provide the services. And here in London, we've always had a very large migrant population, and that is a challenge for our hospitals, and we have to make sure that we do that. But I think we also need to recognise, in terms of the EU, there are 50,000 EU nationals, French and Germans and Spanish and Poles and Italians, working in our NHS as doctors and nurses in our care system, looking after our elderly relatives, often with dementia. There are 60,000 people from EU countries. I see it in my own constituency, very hard-working young Spanish men and women coming to Britain, working really hard hours, helping our care system. And in this debate about immigration, we should have a balanced debate where we recognise the huge amount that people who come to our country and put in and help out in our public services.
OK, Prime Minister, final question from Gerard, who I believe is sitting over here.
Hi, Gerard.
Hi, Mr Cameron. Many attempts during this referendum to engage with young people have been either patronising or really scaremongering. Could, for the rest of the campaign, as we stand the most to lose from a Leave vote, could you try and engage more with the positive case for Remain?
Right. Well, I've tried to be tonight incredibly positive about stronger, safer, better off, the opportunities for young people. Obviously, I'm 50 this year, so maybe I'm not the best person to communicate with young people, but I would say there are two very strong arguments. One is the opportunity argument. If we stay in this single market, young people, as they come out of an apprenticeship or come out of university, there are going to be many better opportunities. We'll have more highly paid careers and jobs and training schemes because of the companies operating in the single market. But I think perhaps there's a bigger and more emotional argument, which is what sort of country do we want our children and young people to grow up in? And I would argue we will be a greater country, a more exciting country to live in and work in if we're inside the European Union and able to affect the world because it affects us. I want us to be in there, helping to tackle Ebola in West Africa or tackle climate change, or make sure we're standing up to terrorism, making sure we're signing the exciting trade deals with India and China so that young people have the careers and all the rest of it. And I don't, you had Nigel Farage earlier. His vision, I think, he says he wants to take the country back. I think he wants to take the country backwards. It's women having to breastfeed in the corner of the room, or people being denigrated as potential criminals. I don't think that's a positive vision. Well, that's not the country I want for my children. It's not the country I think we are, and it's not the country that we will be if we vote to remain in on June the 23rd and reject Nigel Farage's view of Britain. Let's
take a few more audience questions. One here at the front. We'll just wait for the mic to come down.
Hi.
I appreciate all the points you've made, and I think I'm voting out, unfortunately, but I appreciate the points that you've made this evening. I think they're really interesting. I'm afraid not. The one thing that doesn't sit well with me I know we've gone back and forth this evening over the exact number that we pay per week to be a member of the European Union. I think it's now net 260 million a week or something. What doesn't feel right to me is you say that you feel that being part of the European Union will be a better and stronger country for your children in the future. We have record-breaking numbers of homelessness at the moment. We have people using food banks unlike we've ever seen before. We have people living families of 10, 15 living in two-bedroom properties. How is that a country that our children can be proud of?
First of all, let me take the contribution issue, because that 350 million on the bus, I think now has been proved again and again to be, as the Office of National Statistics called it, misleading. The truth is, what we put in net to the European Union is just more than 1 penny out of every pound we pay in tax. Now, that amounts to quite a lot of money when you add it all up. But I would argue that we get back for that money many times over, more money back, because we're part of this market of 500 million people. And that's how I'd answer your second question. Look, if we come out of this single market, we're going to be, inevitably, I think, a less wealthy country with a smaller economy. And if we, as a result of that, have lower tax revenues, we'd have less money to spend on the challenges that you rightly identify. And look, I think if you really want independent statistics, two bodies, the National Institute and the Institute for Fiscal Studies, both have said there is no saving from leaving the EU. There is a cost. They put it at somewhere between 20 billion and 40 billion pounds in extra cuts that would have to be made or taxes that would have to be raised. So I do think it's a total myth that you can leave the EU and make a saving. You leave the EU, you have a smaller economy, and therefore, actually, you have more problems in delivering the schools and the hospitals and the bright futures that we want for young people.
Prime Minister, do you think that there's a risk that this campaign, this attempt to recreate the Project Fear that worked so well in Scotland, could be something that fails when it comes to a UK
Well, I just don't call it Project Fear. Look, we are making legitimate points from independent forecasters about things that could happen if we leave. If I was Prime Minister and the Governor of the Bank of England said there might be a recession, and I turned around and said, well, don't listen to him. I mean, after all, he's only an expert. If I turned around to the Institute for Fiscal Studies and said, well, ignore what this totally independent body is saying, I would be completely betraying the interests of the people that I'm meant to be working for. And to say, as some people do, that, you know, we've heard enough from experts. I mean, you wouldn't buy a house without listening to an expert about the state of the building. This is more complicated than buying a house. It's like building a bridge. You wouldn't build a bridge without an architect or an engineer. We should listen. It doesn't mean they're always right. But when you've got such a consensus, and I think what the Leave campaign, what the Leave campaign are doing is basically any time you raise any of these concerns, they just shout Project Fear and refuse to answer any questions about it. And I don't think that is good enough. It is a genuine leap in the dark, because they will not tell you what their plans are.
Okay. Sorry, we haven't got time. I'm really sorry. We're running out. That's all we've got time for, I'm afraid, at the moment. But, Prime Minister, thank you so much for coming here. Thank you so much for answering so many questions. And now, just very quickly, we're going to see how you did. All the audience, quickly, for the last time tonight, have their little gadgets. So we're going to ask them if the answers today have made them either happy or sad. So please vote now. And Remy, what's the reaction on Facebook?
And while they're doing the vote now, we'll see what the reaction is on Facebook. It looks like, oh wow, 58% angry and 42% love. So that's quite different from what we've seen so far, unfortunately, Prime Minister. But that's what the people thought online. Let's see what people thought in the audience here.
So in the audience today, what we're seeing much more positive, actually. Although it's been quite angry in the room, we've got 58% love and 42% angry. So, Prime Minister, will you take that if that's the result?
I've got 13 days to go. I've got a lot more people to convince I can see at home or indeed in the room. But I will work incredibly hard, because I think this matters an enormous amount for our country, and I really want us to get it right.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And that's all from us here in the arena. Stay tuned now for some post-match analysis. All that remains for us to do is to thank our fantastic live audience, our speakers earlier today, and, of course, Prime Minister David Cameron.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
We've had a long day. Technology worked all the way through. Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim and Emily. That was UK Prime Minister David Cameron answering your questions live on Facebook. We're living in the future. Remember the days when Facebook was just about finding out if your crush was single. But how did Mr Cameron do? How can we see what he's doing? Well, we have a secret weapon, an immigrant you know and love who's unafraid to step in. I'm joined by BuzzFeed UK's Europe editor, Alberto Nardelli. Alberto, so how do you think Cameron did there? I mean, he was once again focusing very strongly on the economy, but it was quite a feisty little session for him there.
Indeed. I think it was a very interesting discussion. I think one of the challenges that the Prime Minister has is that a few months ago he said he was prepared to leave the European Union, and now he's saying if Britain leaves the EU, it will be the apocalypse. And really, between point A and point B, what's changed is this agreement that he has had with the other EU member countries, and in it we have things like being able to index child benefits being sent abroad. That affects about 0.3% of child benefits in the UK, not really apocalypse-type material. And I think that's a difficulty he has. Lots of people listen and understand the economic arguments, but they're saying, hang on a minute, a few months ago you were saying very different things.
And so, yeah, he's trying to make his case from the perspective of the economy, whereas the other side are trying to talk a lot about immigration, aren't they? So, I mean, do you think he handled that well, or is he trying to just keep it always coming back to his line?
I think that's been the theme throughout the day. The Remain side really wants to bring this debate up to the economy. The challenge that the Prime Minister has when he talks about immigration, of course, is that he is the one that has set this target of net migration to tens of thousands, about 100,000 people, which the government has failed to meet. And that is the number by which he is today measured on this issue.
No, absolutely. So in many ways, he's having to fight both against his actions in the past, as well as the Leave campaign.
Absolutely. And there are lots of examples of that. It's like when you use such strong language like there will be an economic crisis, almost like an apocalypse, as we said earlier, but then it's very different from what you say in the past. It's hard for voters to believe you.
Well, we're going to do some more post-match analysis on all 4 of the town halls we've seen today later, but let's just remind ourselves of a clip from the Q&A with David Cameron just now.
Frankly, if I wanted an easier life with a slightly, let's be honest, divided Conservative Party, if I wanted an easier life, I'd say, look, it's a big decision. There's strong arguments on one side, strong arguments on the other side. It's a balanced view, and on balance, I think we should stay. And I'd have a quieter life. I'm not saying that. And do you know why I'm not saying that? I don't believe it. I don't think it is a very nuanced or balanced view. I think it's very clear that we'll be stronger, safer, and better off if we stay in. Now, people can disagree with me, and they can take the alternative view and they can vote against. But I don't want to wake up as your Prime Minister on the 24th of June feeling I haven't been frank and clear about what I think.
So that was David Cameron there. Now, let's talk about the themes that emerged from the day. Like, what were the key things that came out throughout all of the town halls, the 4 of them we saw today?
Well, I think we began the day saying the Remain side wants to talk about the economy, Leave wants to talk about immigration, and that was really clear throughout the day. One very interesting moment, I thought, was during Mordaunt's town hall, when there was a back and forth with one of the audience members around the famous £350 million pound number. I thought it was very interesting that that is the figure that everyone remembers. When other people within the audience tried to cite the net figure, no one really remembered that, so it shows...
I mean, like, literally, what is the figure? Everybody knows 350 million because it's on the side of buses. What is it?
Well, the problem is that it is more complicated because you apply the rebate at the very beginning, so the UK doesn't actually send that money until that rebate is applied, and then there's money money that comes back. So when you look at the net figure, it's closer to £200 million a week.
Okay, can I stop you there? Nothing else. I just really wanted to stop you there. Right. OK, so we've seen that. We've seen before the PM there was Nigel Farage, before that there was Nicola Sturgeon, and before that there was Penny Mordaunt, the Armed Forces Minister that Alberto was just talking about. Now, out of interest, Alberto, who did you think did best or worst out of today?
I think it's a very difficult question. I think all the participants there were stronger moments and weaker moments. It's really about what lines stick. And I think, as I said before, I think that £350 million figure is really sticking. And I think that debate around the economy and immigration it's really ultimately about that question now.
OK. Well, let's just remind ourselves of a key moment from the debate with Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, I've said, and I'm trying to say it honestly and frankly, I think in Scotland, if there was a vote to leave, and obviously that would assume Scotland had voted to stay in, I think many, many people in Scotland, not everybody, but many people in Scotland would say we want to look again at independence because that would be the way to protect our membership of the European Union. So I'm being frank about that. But I'm also saying I hope that doesn't happen, because I hope the whole of the UK votes to remain. And I hope once you've made up your mind, you make up your mind to vote to remain too.
So with me now, we have two of our audience who asked some excellent questions. We have Flora, who asked a question of Nicola Sturgeon, and Yasmin, who asked a rather sweary question of David Cameron. We'll get to you next. I'm very excited to hear more about this. But first of all, Flora, can you tell us what your question was and if you thought it was answered well?
So I asked Nicola Sturgeon whether, in the event of a very narrow win for Brexit, with Scotland voting with a majority to remain, whether Nicola Sturgeon would consider using her vote in Scottish Parliament, in her Scottish Nationalist Party votes in Westminster Parliament, which actually has to do with the repealing of the legislation, whether she'd allow them to vote for Brexit, or whether she'd sort of keep them in line with Remain, or whether she'd let them free to make their own decision.
And will you remind us how she answered, because some of our viewers might have missed this earlier?
So she sort of answered saying mostly that she didn't really want to consider hypotheticals, and she didn't really give a firm answer, but she did say that democracy was we needed to respect democracy, but she didn't say whether we'd need to respect Scottish democracy over British democracy, or British democracy over Scottish democracy.
She was in a bit of a bind, wasn't she, trying to explain her allegiance to Europe as opposed to the UK, wasn't it? How do you think she did overall?
Well, I think I can understand it and see where she's coming from, and I think there is a difference between national sovereignty and being part of an international group, and we can be part of lots of other international groups without giving up our sovereignty. So I can see where she's coming from, but I don't think she necessarily explained it in the best way possible to the people in the audience tonight.
Well, thank you very much. Would you do it again?
Do you come here?
Would you come here for another 4 hours?
Come for the next one.
All right, we'll get you another 4 in and see if you can do the whole thing again. So, Yasmin, I have your quote here, which you directed to Prime Minister David Cameron. I think you said the Tories have fucked every fucking thing up in this country, to much acclaim on Twitter, as I just glanced at before. Explain your reasoning about asking this as the Prime Minister.
How long have you got?
I think 2 minutes.
There's so many reasons. I mean, cutting people's disability benefits is what he's done, obviously, they wanted to do recently, and I think that is absolutely disgusting. The most vulnerable people in society, and they're doing that, and they just come straight from Eton, straight to Parliament. They have no idea what it's like to live in real life. They've got absolutely no idea, and they're obviously pulling all this control in and saying, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, remain in, and everything like that, but that's not why I'm remaining in. It's all scaremongering.
Are you a student right now?
Yeah.
Where are you a student?
London, Matt.
And what are you studying?
Politics.
Very good. Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you.
And so there might be a bit... I have a suspicion that people might pick up on this quote particularly. And do you stand by what you asked and the way you asked it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of adrenaline running through, and I kind of wish I had it in a more better manner, but obviously I have so much passion regarding how the Tories are running this country, and it's absolutely disgusting for the majority of people in this country.
How do you think Cameron did answering questions? Do you think he gave good answers?
Blank, total blank, expressionless, no passion. It's all been done by a spin doctor who's all had it kind of scripted beforehand, so...
I have a feeling he could take some lessons from you, possibly. So maybe you should go into be a new advisor to the Prime Minister. And so, overall, who do you think performed best out of our 4 politicians?
I thought the person I was most surprised by was the first one, the Minister for the Army. I'm not a Brexit... Penny is her name, I've forgotten that. I'm not a Brexiteer, but I thought she answered questions well. She didn't dodge difficult questions. She actually dealt with some stuff, and I agreed with lots of her arguments, even if I didn't agree with the outcome with them, and I thought she did incredibly well. But I thought all of them actually did. I thought David Cameron was charismatic today. I thought he was on better form than usual. I thought it all went well for all of them, pretty.
Okay, well, thank you very much to you both. So the UK's Prime Minister and Scotland's First Minister, of course, weren't the only ones to be sounding off at the BuzzFeed Facebook EU Referendum Town Hall. Hard to say that in one breath. There was also a bit of this.
That if you have a sensible, balanced immigration policy that has numbers coming into a country on a reasonable level, the chances of integration are very high. If you have an irresponsible immigration policy and very large numbers of people coming into the country, the chances of integration are very low. That's all I'm saying.
The problem with the EU is that you can never really trust it. It says, no, we're not going to do that. But, a few years on, it's exactly what we're doing. And this is our opportunity to say, no, we want to cooperate with Europe, we want to help with all of these things, but we want to do it on our own terms.
That was UKIP leader Nigel Farage and Armed Forces Minister Penny Mordaunt from the Leave side. And with me now, two more of our audience who got to ask questions in the arena, joined by Dinah and Louise. Now, Dinah, you asked Nigel Farage a question. Go over how you felt that went down.
So I asked him a question about the Leave's sort of scaremongering and how they were using a lot of tactics and blaming a lot of things on immigration and things like that. And I felt that he didn't answer the question, honestly. He was just like, oh, no, there's been none of that, you know. And I felt that that's not true. That's all the Leave campaign has been, is just a whole bunch of scaremongering. And then he did it himself again when he said at the end, he was like, oh, yes, you know, the migrant sex thing, it's a very, like, possible that that could happen here. And in my opinion, it's useless to be saying those things when we have such a problem here already with those things. And I said that as well to him, that we have one of the highest statistics of rape in terms of countries worldwide. And we are such a small country. We have a very small population. 2 women a day are dying from domestic violence. And we don't talk about that. We don't talk about the fact that that's not done by migrants. That's done by British men. And things like that. And, you know, it's just frustrating to see that now, all of a sudden, all of these people are saying, oh, we really care about women's rights, we really care about women's rights, when the only reason they care about women's rights is to demonise other people.
Do you feel that he engaged you for questions? Were you satisfied with his answer?
No, I wasn't satisfied with his answer at all. He completely brushed it off, and I was really upset, actually, that I didn't get a chance to really talk with him either. Like some of the other people who they got a bit more chance. I think we were running out of time and stuff, so I felt like I didn't get a chance to be like, actually, you're not answering the question. You have said these things. Boris has said these things. A lot of prominent Leave people have said these things, and yeah.
Absolutely. Now, going to you, Louise. You, a long time ago now, spoke to Penny Mordaunt. How do you think she dealt with your question? Remind us what you asked.
I asked why they don't trust the British public with the correct information about how much we are actually putting into the EU. I feel that she kind of answered my question, but there was a lot of waffling about. I feel like I really needed to push her a little bit to get an actual figure out of her. And if that is actually the figure, then why are they going around saying it's 350 million, regardless of whether it's net or gross? When you see 350 million on a big red bus, you're driving around trying to campaign, you're going to think that's the number when it's lower. So that's what I had an issue with.
Do you think that she did well apart from that?
Apart from that, she actually, she did. I think she answered questions. I'm not on her side, but I think she gave like in-depth answers to every question, and she did all right, I suppose. But
overall, I'll ask you first. Who do you think performed best out of all of the people that we saw today?
Definitely Nicola. Definitely. I think she was very direct into turning the conversation back to the EU when she was being asked about Scotland. And yes, that is another issue, but we're here to talk about the EU referendum, and I think she was very on point and direct.
And how about you, Dana?
I agree with Louise as well. It was definitely Nicola Sturgeon who was the best. I felt Penny and David Cameron both came off too well rehearsed. They did the whole politician thing of answering the questions they wanted to and not the questions that were put to them. And I agreed with some of what Nigel Farage said in terms of Leave, and, you know, he really put a few actually good points across for it. But Nicola Sturgeon was my standout.
Absolutely. Did anything that anybody say change either of your minds?
Absolutely not.
I think Nicola Sturgeon made me a little bit wary on the Leave side, I'll be honest. I'm still staunch Leave, but she did make me reconsider a little bit.
OK, well, excellent. Well, I'm glad that you found that some of the politicians were too over-rehearsed, which I think is not a problem that you'll ever encounter with our production here. And back to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Tom. So, we now find ourselves at the end of a very special, long day. Thanks to all of our guests, the politicians, as well as the brave souls who sat in our audience for so long. I hope you all got a wee break. And to our viewers at home, thank you, dear viewer, for staying with us to the very bitter end. We hope you don't regret it. So, here we are. We've made a few new friends and a lot of memories. And as you can probably tell, this has been the first time BuzzFeed UK or Facebook have ever tried anything like this. So, if we screwed it up, oh well. Fuck it, as Yasmin says so famously. So anyway, now we're off to drink our own body weight in alcohol. Good night, everyone, and thanks for watching. Yay! Yay.